Got bring us on screen.
Hey, there I am.
I think we're live, aren't we, Lucinda? As far as we can see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi everyone, and welcome to the live Client Max webinar. So today, Lucinda will be going through with myself, providing my own thoughts and experience on the 6 numbers you should be all over in your marketing. So I guess Lucinda, do you want to kind of tee up the topic a little bit, maybe give us a little bit of context, a little bit of background before we dive in?
Yeah, sure. So when people talk about marketing, they often think about the creative side. They think about the graphics and the copy and the campaigns and all that side of things. And while all of that stuff is really important, a part that's often not talked about anywhere near enough is the numbers in your marketing. So what we're going to go through today is I'm going to talk about the 6 numbers that I think as a marketer are really, really critical to be tracking in your businesses and in your marketing. And explain how I use them in campaigns, how I use them to guide decisions and campaigns.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And also, I guess I'll just kind of add from my own perspective that these 6 numbers, numbers you've learned in your background in the marketing world, and I might not necessarily be using all 6 numbers, even myself, as a practicing accountant. And I like that kind of tension that we can say there's always a kind of best practice and things we know we should and could be doing. And there's always the realities of trying to run our business. And I can provide some feedback from that side of things. So, yeah, sounds good.
Cool. I'll do a quick screen share with you guys. Let me just go on full screen here. Cool. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Nice. So what we're going to talk about today, as I've said, is the 6 numbers that you need to be all over in your marketing. I will say, just on a little caveat, they are not the only 6 numbers that you should be all over in your marketing, but they are the most critical ones. Now, obviously, as accountants, you guys know that numbers matter, and marketing is no different to that. You're already pretty hot on numbers and understanding the importance of numbers, how they impact things, how frequently you should be on top of them and paying attention to them. So what I want to do here is kind of bring that foundation belief and processes that you guys already have, but into the marketing that you do within your companies already. The reason that it's so important is because the way most people market is quite gut instinct based. From what I've found, I've worked with hundreds of business owners throughout various different countries, Canada, America, UK, etc. And quite often it's rare that I come across a company who is making their marketing decisions based on data. When we're talking small businesses, obviously if we get to the big corporates and things, they're a little bit different. But when you're making decisions based on gut instinct and ideas,
Yeah.
there's a few ways that you can go wrong. And the most common things that I see is I will hear from people, they'll go, oh yeah, we tried ads and just burnt
Yeah.
through 6 grand and made nothing back. Now, my first question to that is, how did you get to 6 grand without knowing it wasn't working? Now, I'll talk a bit later on about different numbers that you should be tracking, especially in ads as well. But yeah, so if you're tracking your numbers properly, you would never get to 6 grand without knowing it wasn't bringing you a decent return. You would call it much earlier on. So being on top of your numbers can really stop you from burning cash.
And I think that's sorry, that's just on your point. That's just so true. When I hear, and Google Ads is a brilliant example, and you hear people say, "I've tried Google Ads, it didn't work in my business," and really, there's no science behind it. There was no testing. There was no measuring. They don't know what the ROI is. And going back to some of the previous sessions we talked about, they probably didn't even know who their ideal customer is. So yeah, so I think for a lot of people, this is a great place for them to kind of understand how to get a little bit more logical and scientific when you're doing your marketing.
Yeah, and getting more logical and scientific will make you more money because it will help you to change the parts of the marketing that can be adapted to improve your results, but it will also stop you burning money on things that aren't working. When I work with clients, there have been clients that I've started working with on a consulting basis, and the first thing I say to them is turn off your ads. Now, as a marketer, that's probably not what I'm meant to be saying, but it is, because once I've looked at the numbers and gone, oh, okay, that's interesting, let's just turn that off for now, then we can go back and look at, okay, why is it not working, which part of it's not working, etc. So yes, it can help you not burn money and help you to make more money, but it can also give you confidence to scale your campaigns as well. So I quite often hear hesitancy in smaller business owners where they've got a campaign that's working okay and it's bringing them a nice trickle of leads, etc. And I say, okay, cool, let's ramp up the budget. And they get a little bit nervous. And that's just because they haven't quite got the data to give them the confidence to scale. And then what that does is it throttles their business growth.
Yeah, I guess, sorry, Lucinda, that's the word scale is, I think, a really important word to highlight, really, because any kind of proper professional serious business owner, you can only scale what you know is working, and if you don't know what's working, you can't scale it. So I think that's such an important word, and in many ways, as business owners and marketeers, people should be trying to figure out how can they scale their marketing, and you can't do that if you don't know what's working.
No. Well, I mean, you can. It's just a very dangerous gambling game to play.
Yeah.
So the 6 numbers that I want to talk about today, as I said, there are lots of numbers that we can track in marketing, and every number has a really valid use. But you can't track all of them all at once, and you can't start with all of them. So today I'm going to talk about the 6 that I think are really critical ones to make sure make sure you're tracking, and make sure they are a part of your marketing analysis and process. First one is fairly obvious. It's marketing campaign spend. So we're going to track not only all different marketing, but quite often when I speak to people, I say, okay, are you tracking your marketing campaigns? And they'll say yes. And then I ask them to pull it apart into separate campaigns. So if I'm like, okay, how many leads did you get from Facebook ads? How many leads did you get from Google? How much did it cost you to get ads from Facebook ads compared to Google, compared to referrals, etc.? And while they might have a general overview of, oh, well, I know that last week I had 30 leads come in and they cost, in total, it cost me £50 per lead.
Yeah.
But what they can't tell me is which campaigns delivered those leads and what the cost per campaign is. So it's really important to track all of your campaigns, but also all of them individually.
And I guess on that note, with meta advertising, I've done in my own business, and obviously Google, we can drill down into the platforms, as you say, and get specific on those campaigns, and kind of figure out which ones are giving us the ROI we want, which ones are kind of winning, for want of a better word, when we're going through that testing period. Something I've done recently in my own business. My kind of default preference for what I thought would have performed on a meta campaign ended up being 10 times worse than a kind of random experiment I decided to do at the end. But the data, it was clear which one was better from a numbers perspective.
Yeah, and not only individual campaigns within one particular ad channel, but also different types of marketing. So I had one client who was in the wedding industry, and they would do wedding exhibitions, they would do Google ads, and they would do adverts in wedding directories as well.
Yeah.
And they had an allocated capacity of £50 per lead. They could afford to pay £50 per lead and still make a decent profit, etc.
I believe Lucinda might have dropped off for a second. Let's just give her a few moments to return. Can you hear me, Lucinda? Yeah. Okay. So I think it's a really interesting point with what Lucinda just said, actually, because when we think about marketing, we are thinking about digital marketing. We are nowadays, most of us anyway, we are thinking about Google Ads, we're thinking about our website, we're thinking about social media, we're thinking about Facebook, LinkedIn. But actually, marketing is holistic, really. It's, it could be putting leaflets through doors, it could be some form of face-to-face marketing, it can be loads of different mediums, and it brings us back to, which is kind of outside the scope of what we're necessarily talking about today, but the 3 M's, which is market, message, media. And digital market is just one form of those. And we don't want to necessarily restrict ourselves or just rely on one form of marketing. So digital marketing is just one form. Yes, in my experience, it's one of the forms with the biggest opportunity because we've got more, we can track things easier. So when you're doing digital marketing, for example, someone clicked on a link. If someone watched a video, we can get quite granular. We know how long they've watched the video for. So did they drop off within the first 5 minutes? Did they get to the end? Did they finally get far enough to watch the pitch? Hi, Lucinda.
Oh, I had a power
So
cut. Took out my Wi-Fi.
oh wow, yeah. So I just used it as an opportunity to actually talk about. I thought it was a really interesting point you mentioned with comparing more traditional forms of marketing or whatever it is that actually many people might be thinking about purely digital marketing coming into today's webinar, and I've just talked about the really where it all comes from, market message and media, really, in terms of the 3Ms of marketing. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting point that we shouldn't restrict ourselves with one form of marketing.
Yeah, and one of the other problems that I come across quite often, I'll just share my screen with you guys again. Yeah, one of the other problems I come across quite often is
Right, I think Lucinda's dropped off. Can you hear me, Lucinda? Yeah, okay. So I'll just elaborate on that point. Sorry, guys, for the disruption.
hello.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it cut out again. There you go.
Promise I usually have a power supply in my office.
Yeah.
So we were talking about different types of marketing when we say sometimes what I come across as well is clients who have they have a really good funnel and they've got one really good source of leads, which brings in enough that they can just get by and keep going and not have to think about it too much. And that's a really dangerous place to be, because if that one funnel breaks, if you're relying on Meta ads, for example, and Meta suddenly changes their algorithm or suddenly changes their rules and you're no longer allowed to advertise or whatever it is that happens, and that wipes out your one source of leads, you're in real trouble. If you've got 3 or 4 different lead sources and something wipes out one of your lead sources, well, it's an annoyance, but you're not panicking and trying not to sink.
Yeah, and I guess really the kind of the analogy I've heard before is you don't want this single pillar diving board, and if you remove that pillar, everything collapses. We want the kind of the big old-fashioned banks with all the multiple pillars at the front. We want many different things to strengthen the foundation. And I was in a chatting to some accountants recently, and we were talking about marketing. And actually, what was really interesting was we've all got similar sized businesses, but we've all had very different strategies around the channels we do marketing. Someone focuses more on LinkedIn. Someone was doing a lot of actual code calling to supplement other forms of marketing. Someone does events. Someone had strategic partnerships. Yeah, so it's making sure we're not being narrow-minded, but I guess it comes back to the numbers and the ROI in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure, like here I'm saying, making sure you're tracking each of them individually. So yes, you have to have an idea overall of how's your marketing delivering, what's the average that you pay for a lead, what's the average conversion rate, etc. But what you also need to know is for each individual type of marketing that you're doing, what are those numbers as well.
And just out of curiosity, Lucinda, these really interesting and cute animals on the slides. Is there is there a story behind that?
No, the story just is that as you get to know me more,
Yeah,
you'll know that I don't like things to be boring.
yeah.
And
I'm
if
all
I
on
was
board.
to pick the images that match what I'm talking about, you're going to
Yeah,
have a load of pictures of laptops, and
it's
that's
good.
just really dull.
Very good point.
So I always think the idea of the image is just to make it a bit more interesting, and who doesn't love cute animals?
There's a little bonus for people there. How can you make your presentation a little bit more interesting? Remove the laptops, remove the buildings and the handshakes and all that sort of stuff.
Also, it makes it a little bit more memorable.
Yeah.
So I've done presentations in live rooms with people sat in front of me, and my images are just as ridiculous, and people comment on it and they remember me as, oh yeah, you were the one that had all the weird animal pictures. And now obviously I want to be remembered for what I do, but I want to be remembered.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So bring us on to our second number, cost per lead. So you've already heard me mention this a little bit throughout today because it's such a critical number that you need to be aware of. In terms of how you calculate it, I know you guys are probably all pretty hot on numbers and calculations and things, but I have put the formulas on there. So it's just total spend divided by number of leads generated. Really simple. The reason we measure cost per lead is because it's a really good way of telling us how well the campaign is performing. And we should all have a number that we've calculated based on our real business numbers, based on our profit margins and our cost of delivery and all of that, that we know how much we can afford to pay for a lead. So when we know how many leads we have to get to convert into a sale and how much we make per sale and what our profit is on that sale, well, then we can work back and go, well, if I know I need 10 leads to make a sale, and I can afford to spend £100 to make a sale, well, then I know that I can spend £10 per lead. So it's not just about understanding the cost per lead in terms of what the campaigns are delivering, but you need to know your cost per lead target as well, as in what you're aiming for.
And I might possibly be jumping ahead a little bit, but I guess in many ways, the spend, the cost per lead is also going to be influenced by how many leads do we need to kind of convert and get a customer. And just to give people some kind of real numbers in my business, I've always used roughly £50 a lead for and that can be quite a generalized number because it might be completely different for Facebook, it might be completely different for Google Ads, it might be completely different for physical campaigns and non-digital campaigns. And for me, that helps me track as a rough rule of thumb, is this performing the way I want it to?
Yeah. Another really important thing about cost per lead is that a lower cost per lead is not always better. So I've got one client that I've worked with where their target was to lower their cost per lead. And we did that. Then we worked with them to get their cost per lead down. And what happened was that their conversions tanked. So we were paying less for a lead, but the quality of that lead was not as good. And what that meant is that while we were so they were paying less for a lead, which meant they could spend on more leads and get more people to talk to. The number of people that at the end were actually converting into paying customers didn't increase in line with the number of extra leads, it actually decreased. So what they were better doing was paying more per lead for fewer leads that were higher quality, that were actually going to go on and become customers. So I just wanted to raise that here because I think it's really important that people get really hung up on, oh no, we can bring the cost per lead down, but that's not the aim of the game. The aim of the game is, how can I get as many of the right people talking to me for a cost that I can afford to spend to still be profitable? And as long as you're coming in within those parameters, then you've got a great campaign and it works. If you start trying to squeeze it and pull down the cost per lead, you can end up really just kind of hindering yourself.
Yeah, and I guess ultimately at a wider level, it's how much we spend in, although we can get more granular, how much we spend in and how much is that turning into actual real customers and, pounds in the bank, really. And the cost per lead is one of the things to kind of get from, to get a bit more granular. But as you say, not to get too obsessed with trying to drive that number down.
Yeah, and also it's knowing that the numbers all along the way. So for example, if you know how many leads you need to get a customer, you know how much that customer is going to be worth to you, you know how much you can then afford to spend to get a customer, it changes your perception on your cost per lead. Let's say we're talking about ads, because that's a really good simple funnel to explain. If I'm paying, like for one of my campaigns, I'm paying about £18 per lead. Now, if you say I'm going to charge you £18 to give you an unqualified lead that you don't know anything about, do you want to pay it? It's quite a lot. It's like, I'm not excited about £18 per lead in that context. But what I know with my numbers, I know, okay, £18 per lead. I've calculated that out. I've got the averages of how many of those leads turn into customers and how much that is worth to me. And that campaign is bringing me about a 400% ROI. So I'm well happy with that. Will I pay £18 per lead for a 400% ROI? Absolutely. So it shifts the perspective of it and how you feel about that spend.
Yeah, and I guess going back to the scalability element, if we can scale our marketing spend, but it means spending more, you know, per lead, but we're still getting that ROI and we're actually growing our businesses, that's more important than getting obsessed on, you know, individual numbers.
Yeah, you're tracking that, like your targets for your cost per lead should be set by what you can afford, not by how cheap you can get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we've got customer lifetime value. So this ties into cost per lead, and I played around with these slides and I switched them around a few times to decide which needed to come first. So customer lifetime value, which again, I'm sure a lot of you guys are already familiar with, is the total amount of money that a customer is worth to you for the entirety of their spend and life with you. So with my clients, for example, if I work with a consulting client, they will likely stay with me for 2 or 3 years, possibly longer, which means for 36 times their monthly fee that they pay me, that is the customer lifetime value. Now, obviously, if you're calculating customer lifetime value, you can look at and understand a lot more about how much you can actually afford to pay for a client. So let's say I'm selling a service that's worth 100 quid a month, and I know that someone's going to stay with me for 2 years. That client is not worth £100 to me. That client is worth £2,400 to me. And you know, I can spend then 300 quid to get a £2,400 client. But if you haven't worked out the customer lifetime value, you might start thinking, oh, well, it's £100 sale initially. They're going to pay me £100 upfront to start with, which means I can't afford to spend even £100 because I won't make any profit. So understanding both all these numbers together, you'll see as we go through, and I talk about some of the other numbers, you'll start to see how they interlink and how they work with each other to give you a better picture on targets and profitability of your campaigns.
Yeah, and you know, from the accounting industry perspective, clients, we're in a very fortunate business where clients are quite sticky. We don't need to go out and, you know, try and win back the customer every year. They tend to stay with us. So it could actually be many, many years. But even if you're doing prudent calculations and, you know, a lot of people in you know, with Client Max would be forward thinking, probably won't be down the lower end of the sort of clients they're trying to attract. But let's say you've got a 3K client per year in terms of revenue, and they stay with you for 5 years. That's 15K in terms of the revenue. Obviously, some people might get a little bit more granular and they might use the 15K. Some people might think about their margin, you know, how much is it costing them? So if you've got a 50% margin, there's 7.5K left there. And, you know, even if we just brought that right down to 3K, so let's get back to 1 annual's worth of fees. How much would you want to spend or be willing to spend to get a 3K customer? And that's kind of where my metrics of £50 per lead or £500 per customer come from in my business. It seems like a good deal to me if I'm spending 500 quid and I get a 3K customer. And being around a lot of accountants, I imagine a lot of people watching this have never thought about their marketing spend in that way. And if you go to the market to buy clients from a retiring accountant, you're spending 1 times revenue. So a 3K customer per annum, you will spend 3K, Lucinda, to actually acquire that client.
Okay.
So anything less than 3K, we're actually winning as accountants in terms of what we can afford to spend in that
Yeah.
example.
And another thing that I think is always really useful when we're talking about marketing numbers is when you get really specific on your numbers, when you understand your customer lifetime value, your cost per lead, your conversion rate percent, when you understand all of this, it allows you to take the emotion out of your marketing decisions. And I know that for a lot of people, they can have some discomfort with spending on marketing because there's an element of unknown. You know, you have to test campaigns. Sometimes things don't work. Sometimes you don't make a return. And often people have been burnt in some way in the past by some sort of marketing. Either they've worked with a marketing agency that hasn't delivered, they've burnt a lot of money on ads, something like that. So there's sometimes anxiety around marketing spend. And I don't think it's always viewed as logically and unemotionally as it should be, whereas getting into the numbers like customer lifetime value, like cost per lead, etc., allows you to make much more data driven decisions rather than emotional decisions around your marketing budgets.
Yeah, and accountants love logic. Most of them are very left brain or orientated, and it gives you that confidence that what you're doing is logic based, and you're not making stupid decisions. But also, if we get too emotional, then we kind of there's a sense of scarcity with our spending and our money, and scared money doesn't perform very well, really. So people just throwing money at things, and they're worried about their money running out because they're not tracking anything. That's not really a good place to be in terms of scaling your marketing.
No, and it can hold you back. You could grow faster if you were a bit braver, and you'd be a bit braver if you had the numbers behind you backing up your decisions.
Yeah.
So cost per acquisition, we've actually kind of talked a lot about cost per acquisition already. So cost per lead is the cost per a lead, whether they become a customer or not. Cost per acquisition is how much it costs you to win a new customer overall. So your total marketing spend divided by your number of new customers. And cost per acquisition, again, I like to track both in total for all marketing, what's my average for my company, what's my average cost per acquisition, but then again I like to break it down into campaign level as well, because your cost per acquisition can vary massively, from next to nothing if you've got a referral funnel right up to hundreds of pounds in an ad campaign.
So if I've spent just to help everyone understand, if I've spent £500 on my marketing and I've got one new client from that, then my cost per acquisition will be £500. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, and it might be that going back to the using simple maths, if it's £50 per lead, you've got 10 leads, and one of those leads, which might be a fairly low conversion rate, but one of those leads out of 10, so that's a 10% conversion rate, turns into a customer. That's where the maths break down, and it's kind of understanding your numbers for you in your business.
Yeah. So then we want to talk about on-page conversion rate. So on-page conversion is a really geeky but really cool thing. I get quite excited about on-page conversion because you can do really, like, you can have a really big impact on your sales just by changing your on-page conversion rate. So if I take one of my, well, first of all, I'll explain. On-page conversion rate is the number of people that landed on your website that then convert into a lead or a sale, depending on which stage of your funnel we're talking about. So if we're talking about initial inquiries, your on-page conversion rate would be if 100 people landed on your webpage and 5 filled in your inquiry form, that's a 5% on-page conversion rate.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I really like on-page conversion is because this page often comes quite early on in the funnel, which means that if you can just nudge that percentage rate up a little bit, you can have quite a big impact on your bottom line, on the number of sales that actually end up being customers without increasing your spend, because you're already spending to get them onto the page in the first place.
Yeah.
But if instead of a 5% conversion rate, let's say I could nudge that up to even just an 8% conversion rate, just a 3% improvement. That's 3 extra people. Now, if your inquiry rate, if 50% of inquiries become customers,
Yeah.
well, then that's an extra 1.5, 2 people, one
Yeah.
to 2 people that become a customer without you having to spend any more money. And then what that does in turn is that actually nudges down your cost per acquisition without you having to spend any more money.
And I guess when we're talking about landing pages, I guess if we rewind back and just assume, I'm sure many people are familiar with the concept of a landing page, but I'm sure some people might get it confused with a homepage or just a page on your website. How would you explain what a landing page is and its reason for kind of existing, Lucinda?
Well, first off, on-page conversion rate applies to your website or to a landing page.
Yeah.
A landing page is a page that has been built for a specific purpose. You're going to drive traffic to it, and its job is to just get them to do that one next step. So it's not a whole website where it's going to tell them everything they need to know about you and your service and your pricing and your everything. No, it's just let's say you had an offer for an ebook on 5 ways to save tax.
Yeah.
It would be a page that is specifically just for that one thing to get them to fill in that form.
And I guess, obviously we're not necessarily going in that direction today, but there needs to be alignment with our funnel and our campaign as a whole, because if someone's just got a kind of random Google Ads campaign that goes to a random page on their website, there's misalignment in terms of the prospect journey. So these things need to be aligned.
Yeah, and that kind of touches a little bit on another way that we optimize campaigns. So on-page conversion rate is usually where I start when I'm optimizing a campaign, because it's quite easy to adjust things and it's quite easy to get quite big gains if you change the things that people care about. The main things that I look at, and I mean, we could do a whole session on-page conversion improvements. But the main things I look at is my messaging in line with what they're expecting, which is what you're talking about there. So if someone's searched for tax saving accountants and it drives them to your homepage where you actually talk more about compliance and stuff, then there's an incongruence between the messaging they're expecting and the messaging you're delivering. So improving kind of the messaging, making sure that it meets their expectations, and then also removing friction. To make sure it's an easy next step to take.
And just staying on this just slightly longer, if that's okay, because I know you've got a really strong background in copywriting and getting into people's heads and, helping customers, prospects to take action. And obviously we've got AI nowadays, and anyone can kind of go and throw a question at AI and maybe get a landing page created or some copy created. How do these sort of things fit together in today's kind of environment from your perspective?
So I have a love-hate relationship with AI. I really love it, and sometimes it's really bad. And it's knowing when it's bad is the important thing. So it's a fantastic tool. If you want to write content, fantastic tool for speeding up your content creation, providing you know what good content looks like and providing you know how to prompt it for the right thing. So if I always use the hairdresser analogy is the best way to explain it. So AI is a tool. If you give that tool to a skilled person, what they will create with it is very different to a non-skilled person. So if you gave me a pair of scissors and asked me to cut your wife's hair, I can use scissors and I can cut someone's hair. The end haircut is not going to look anything like if you gave those scissors to a skilled hairdresser.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with AI. So I always say use it with caution. If you're going to use it, but educate yourself first. Make sure you know what a good landing page looks like. Make sure you know what is good in terms of content and copy, etc. And then use the AI to create that, but fast. Don't rely on it to know for you, because I've had clients where we've pulled their campaign apart. So we've pulled their landing page apart. They've got to. You give both to AI. You ask it which one's better. It gives you an answer. You then run campaigns to those pages, and it was totally wrong. Like it just doesn't know. So it will kind of tell you more than it knows, if that makes sense.
And there's, I love that, by the way, the tool and the hairdresser and the scissors to really help people understand. And in many ways, it just comes back to you don't know what you don't know. In many ways, it's probably even worse than the hairdresser example, because if you take some scissors and you don't know what you're doing, you can still probably tell at the end you've done a really poor job. Like, that's not what I expected. But with AI, sometimes people are oblivious. They don't know they've done a bad job.
Yeah. So on page conversion rate, it's the place where I start if I'm wanting to optimize and improve a campaign, and it can have quite a big impact on your bottom line. But I do think, like I said, I think in terms of on-page conversion, how we actually do it, I think we need to do a full session on that. I think that's something we should make sure we put in here. But in terms of tracking it, one of the reasons we track it is not only so that we can optimize it and make it better, but it also tells us if something's going wrong. So I've had clients before where their campaign's tracking along great, average conversion rate percentage fairly low, but we're driving cold traffic to it. So I think they were sitting at about 7%. And then all of a sudden it tanked down to 2%.
Yeah.
Well, they felt it in their lead flow. They were like, hang on, we've got fewer leads, which led to me going, okay, cool. So what's the on-page conversion rate? Where is the problem? Where are the leads dropping off, etc.? We've lost a huge amount of our on-page conversion. What's wrong? Well, then they'd had something had break on the page.
Yeah.
So it kind of leads you to the right place.
And we don't need, like you said, we don't need to get too deep on it now, but I guess just to help people understand how many things this could affect. It's not just the copy, it's not just the branding, what it looks like. It can be the forms, what information we're asking for on the forms. We could be asking for too much information, too little information. It might be the wrong heading on the form. So there's lots of different components that kind of make this such an important part of the journey.
Even again, I don't want to go too granular today, but even the colors that you use, or the button text, or the positioning of the button, or that, like, there's all kinds of different things. There's a hierarchy of where you start and what's the most important thing to look at first, but you can get quite granular on it. And Amazon is an excellent example of this. Is Amazon actually has an entire team that tests conversion rates and tests tiny little things. So they'll test everything, like even changing just the color of the drop shadow on the button, or the slight font on the text. Like, it's all stuff like that. Now, obviously, those tiny types of changes don't have an impact when we're talking small business. But if you're talking the volume of sales that Amazon do, if they nudge up by 0.1%, that's a decent gain.
Yeah, so really, in many ways, there's best practice and there's giving yourself the best chance of success in the beginning. But ultimately, testing these things is where we're going to really know what's working.
Yeah. But most importantly, track it now, so that you know if it's working, you know what your average is, you know what your benchmark is, and you know if you drive 100 people to a page, how many of them are going to become leads.
And I guess not necessarily about on-page conversion, but there might be some people watching or listening and thinking, I'm not getting enough traffic in the first place. But that's a different topic, isn't it? Really, we're assuming we're getting the traffic onto the page. That's a completely different problem that to address if we're not getting enough traffic in the first place.
Yeah, very different. That would be a whole top of funnel issue, and then we'd have to talk about traffic generation and options for that.
Yeah, perfect.
Lead to sale conversion rate percentage. So again, we've touched on this as we've talked through all the different numbers. We've touched on it because, as you can see, all the numbers play into each other. They all feed each other. They all have a relationship that explains something else. So your lead to sale conversion rate is, if I get 10 leads, how many of those leads are going to become a customer?
Yeah.
And the reason we want to know that is because that then tells me how much I can spend on my advertising, how much I can pay on my cost per lead, etc. And it also allows me to, again, a bit like the on-page conversion, it allows me to test and tweak things and see if it makes it better, if it makes it worse, if it increases the conversions, if it decreases them.
Yeah. I just sorry if I'm breaking your chain of thought, but is that a monkey on the screen?
I do believe it is a lemur. Oh, is it? No, is it? Or is it a red panda?
Because I can't help but think, for anybody, if you're listening to this, it might not hit home, but if you're watching it, that's some of my prospects' faces when I tell them the price of our service.
Yes.
But I guess there's some interesting other elements and angles on this as well. That so if some people's got a conversion rate that's too high, that's where pricing comes into it. Where maybe we're actually underpricing our services. So again, like you said, with the cost per lead, bigger is not always better.
Mm.
Or it's not always what we think in terms of the numbers.
No, because again, one of the things that I repeat quite often to my clients is we are looking for profit here. That's the aim of the game. It's not about how many leads can I get. It's not about how many sales can I get. It's about after I've spent on my advertising, after I've converted my leads, after I've delivered my service, how much money is left to put in my pocket at the end. And it can be really easy to lose sight of that when you're focused on lead gen or sales conversions. It's like, oh, well, let's run an offer and let's do a 50% offer. And I'm like, well, okay, fine. Yeah, you'll probably get some people buying, but where's the money left for you at the end?
Yeah.
So there's a lot we could talk about on pricing. I mean, pricing psychology and pricing in general, and also around offers and pricing, and
Yeah.
tying it all back to profitability again.
Yeah, and I think I know with Client Max, our main focus, because I do believe it's one of the number one challenges with a lot of practices is relying on referrals, not having enough lead flow, and because they're not getting enough leads in, they're also not having enough conversations to test their pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're all kind of linked. All these challenges are interlinked, and I'm sure that's things in the community, in the group, we could touch upon to help people. But a lot of these challenges are connected. You fix one, it's generally going to help you somewhere else. There's that synergy between the different areas of the business.
Yeah, and getting that whole overview of knowing, so that you have the confidence. You have the confidence in your marketing. You have the confidence to not stress about if a customer leaves. So,
Yeah,
every company has churn. I have churn. I have had a couple of
yeah.
clients who'd reached the end of their time with me this month. And yes, I'm sad to see them go, but I'm not scared. I'm not stressed. I'm not worried, because I know that I've got X amount of leads coming in. I know that X amount of those leads are going to convert into a sale, which means it will be fine.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing because as accountants, I said we've got a lazy business model in many ways, and that's why a lot of people don't do marketing because it's such a lazy business model. You rely on the repeat business, but we have churn, and everyone watching this will have some element of churn, and it's not beating yourself up for it, but you feel a lot better about that churn if you've got leads coming in and you know your numbers, you know how many you need to get to the
Mm.
next customer and the next sign up.
Yeah, and churn percentage rate it's not on my six numbers,
Yeah.
but it is another number that we track. We track what our average percent of turnover, like of loss of clients in a month, is over a year, etc. And as long as we stay within those parameters, I'm not bothered. Like it's fine, because I know that that number fits with my targets, with my costs, with my everything, and it all plays in together.
Yeah, and it's not for today's topic, but I had a chat with a client of mine recently who did not, so he's a business client, he's not an accountant, runs a martial arts business, and getting leads in was not one of his problems. He's getting hundreds of
Mm.
leads in, but his business is not really growing. So his problem is churn. So his focus is actually how can I keep my customers happy? Is the pricing right? And lots of other different things.
Yeah. So that is my six numbers.
Yeah, I guess yeah, really, I quite like the that slide there because from my perspective, if for people watching this, the six numbers are brilliant and it gives you a playbook, it gives you something to focus on, it gives you kind of best practice for what should be important. But the main thing, what you're saying here, is whatever you're doing, do it with more logic and stop making emotional decisions and have some data to make proper grown-up business decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are some challenges sometimes with getting the data for these numbers. And that's one of the things that I really like about Client Max is the software, because it gives a holistic, from start to finish, shows you everything. All of these numbers that we've talked about, you can get the information for these numbers from Client Max. It will give you your on-page conversion rate percentage in a funnel. You don't even have to calculate it. You just go and there's a nice dashboard that will show you that. And it just makes it really simple. So I have had clients before that were not using Client Max, and they've pieced together various different softwares to do different parts. They've got a CRM, they've got a landing page builder, they've got an email marketing software, etc. They've got social media scheduler, and pulling the data out of those is such a pain. And you end up with bits missing as well. So it's not uncommon to lose your tracking data. So let's say if you're not using Client Max, if you're using other softwares, you're paying for Google Ads, you drive people to a page, they opt in, but the way they opt in, you then lose the tracking UTMs from the Google Ads, which means you can't actually know if that lead came from an ad or not, or which campaign it came from, and then you've lost visibility, and then that data is useless because you've got inaccurate data, which is more dangerous than no data at all. So I just wanted to highlight that that's one of the things that Client Max does really, really well, is give you access to the data and the insights that you need throughout all of your marketing.
And it's an interesting point you just touched upon, because there may be people watching this that are not actually already using Client Max. And one of the things I've realized that my own blind spot is, I just assume everyone's got a CRM system. It's just normal. But actually, in my experience, there's a lot of accountants out there that do not have a CRM system. So a lot of these things we're talking about is just so much more difficult. I mean, what would you say to someone as an accountant, as a business owner, who is on the fence whether they need a CRM system? Which is what Client Max is, more than just a CRM system, but fundamentally something that can put your prospect first, your customer first, and help you scale your marketing.
I mean, if you haven't got a CRM system and marketing automation system, which is what Client Max does, both sides of it, then scaling is going to be a painful and clunky and guesswork based job, because you just don't have the tools for the job. One of the things that I really like in Client Max as well is you can go quite detailed into each client. So if, for example, let's say you're in my CRM, I can go and I can look at you and I can see where you first came from, what your first attribution is, how did you first get in touch with me. I can see how you last got in touch with me. I can see which pages you've visited, which products you're interested in, which of my guides you'd like. I can get so much detail on you in one place that if I wanted to reach out to you and try and convert you into a call or into a sale, I'd have all that information of what you've been interested in, what behaviors you've done, how you've engaged, and I'd know exactly how to get your attention. Now, without a CRM at all, I'm probably not going to have even half of that information. And with a CRM that's not built with marketing and automation in mind, you're not going to have that information.
Yeah, and I don't want to preach to the people already using Client Max, but just I use the term CRM because people are familiar with it. But ultimately, we're talking about something that's going to facilitate and help you grow your business, get more prospects in, manage that journey, make everything a lot easier. And particularly with Client Max, there's the kind of CRM and automation element to make that super easy. What we're talking about today is the education side, because just throwing software at people is not going to grow your business. You need to understand what it's for. We're trying to give you access to potentially a powerful engine, but you need to know how to drive the car ultimately. And then there's the getting started, isn't there really? Is the plug and play, whether it's the social media planner, whether it's getting your first campaign on the road. We just want to make it as easy as possible for people to get going.
And some of the things we've talked about today, we've talked about landing pages. There are templates of landing pages. We've built them. They're there. They're ready to just hit a button on, adjust a few bits on, and send them live. But I think one of the things that is important to just say, because I know that a lot of people listening to this are already on Client Max, is to make sure you're using it to its full extent. Don't just use it and go, oh, well, I've got my social media schedule and my emails sorted. Don't stop there. Get your forms integrated, get your landing pages moved over, so you've got that level of insight into all the numbers that you need.
Yeah, and really, there'd be a lot of people. We know that time is a big challenge for people. So most people using Client Max, they might be using a certain part of it initially. It might be the social media planner, and that's great if that's really making things easier for you. But for me, I call it the 80% approach. You don't need to spend weeks and weeks and weeks and months planning and thinking about it and making it 100% perfect. Get to that 80% good enough as quickly as you can, and test it and improve it. So Jeff Bezos and Amazon, they've got an internal thing where, I think it's 67% is good enough. So over two-thirds, and they get going, and then they do all their testing with the huge amount of resources they've got. We've not got a huge amount of resources as smaller businesses, so it's picking areas to get going on and get some momentum and some wins.
Nice.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, yeah, that's great. Anything else you want to add before we go, Lucinda?
No, I think I have number geeked all over everybody enough.
Yeah, no, I loved your passion around the on-page conversions. You look like you were wanting to do another session on that, but
No,
maybe.
I would. I could talk about. I could talk about conversion optimization all day long.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks everyone, and reach out if you've got any questions. Most of you will be using Client Max, but if you haven't, you can go on the website and you can start a free trial. Thanks everyone.